government or governments plural, but governments absolutely need the all-in participation and talent of the private sector's top leaders, because it is generally the private industry that controls the cyberspace, private industry that will drive the technological innovation, and has the know-how to combat the latest threats. It's in the hands of industries where so much of the world's critical and technological infrastructure rests. Remember, the private sector connects our nations in as many, if not more ways, than governments do. Today, the largest global hubs for transnational data flow are within the United States, Western Europe, coastal China, Japan. And as the use of the internet expands, so does its vulnerability. Consider, and you have considered, the effects of cyber attacks on offshoring and supply chains in those hubs or multiple hubs, on financial, telecom, transportation, and energy and financial systems. In the 21st century, one thing we all agree upon at the summit is nothing moves without electrons. Everything moves across the internet. And this threat is increased by the fact that we continue to deploy new technologies without having in place the sufficient defensive technologies that can counter attacks through our networks. As we all know, there is no such thing as a virtual disruption of business or government activity. And the consequences of a cyber attack have more than a virtual impact on the bottom line. Only on Xbox can you be harmed and come back to life. Real-world attacks have real-world consequences. But we can't get hung up just on the technology, ladies and gentlemen. The technology continues to change at a rapid pace and can easily outpace the international community's ability to develop policies and processes to combat cybercrime, cyber terrorism, and the unjustified acts of cyber warfare. And so how do we fashion policies and programs that are agnostic to the technology, but focus on preparedness, identification, attribution, education, and consequences? We clearly need to design global standards of protection. We need an internationally agreed upon framework and process for dealing with the strategic, policy, and operational issues that transcend geographic or political boundaries. Part of the reason that this summit was convened was to address this issue. But we all understand that at this point, we really don't have a comprehensive global effort to address these challenges. We also understand that many nations are working to develop their own approach, their own sovereign approach to cybersecurity. But collective action is and must be our goal. We must ask ourselves, as many of you within the room have asked and actually discussed today, if trust is a roadblock to this much-needed collaboration. Think about this for a moment. For most of human history, land and air and sea have been the recognized international domains. In the 20th century, space was included in that arena. And over decades, and some might say centuries, nations of the world have discussed and reached agreement on many aspects of peaceful collaboration and cooperation in these domains. And regular discussions, laws, treaties, and agreements have been developed over time. Cyberspace is our newest domain. It's time this new domain be given comparable attention. It's time, one might argue past time, to build the trust and establish the laws and the treaties and the agreements for the cyberspace domain in this, the 21st century. This is why recognition of the Cyber 40 nations and that this summit is so important. We now have the opportunity as well as the responsibility to build within the global community common agreement on how we protect the world's digital infrastructure. We have an opportunity for industry and community leaders to join their governments in an effort to collaborate, to plan, and to the extent possible deter cyber criminals, terrorists, and tyrants from misusing the cyber domain as a means toward their ill-intended ends. And at this moment, permit me to just draw on my own experience as Secretary of Homeland Security for a moment. Let's not forget, nor underestimate the importance and value of getting our communities, and by that I mean individual citizens and families, involved in this effort as well. Several people have alluded to it, even in this morning's discussion. Putting the seatbelt on for a while was an annoyance, and it became automatic. Recycling for a while was mandated, becomes automatic. We need to engage the broader community so these things are mandated, regulated, they become instinctive, they become intuitive. Everybody begins to think, whether it's a young man or woman in the school, somebody playing around at home with their PC, everybody starts thinking about cybersecurity. I used to say at Homeland Security was a national mission and everybody had a role to play. Well, cybersecurity is an international mission, and citizens around the world have a role to play. I think one of our most significant challenges is to create an international culture of security, to promote the basic notion that responsibility for cybersecurity rests in all of us. Everyone has a role to play, not just governments and private sector and NGOs, et cetera. Every citizen has a role to play as well. As a colleague of mine reminded me, we must make it easy, non-threatening, and action-oriented to help individual citizens protect themselves and therefore protect the rest of us. One of the many, many breakthrough ideas at this summit is the prevention and protection begins with each and every one of us. We're going to need to follow on that very aggressively and message that to our citizens. Everyone here understands that citizen involvement in government and industry collaboration is critical to dealing with all these challenges that have been identified. The summit has been the beginning of an inclusive, broad-based international dialogue. I think your biggest challenge is how do you sustain it? How many of you have been to conferences before where you sat around for a day or two, you met, you exchanged great ideas, you exchanged cards, you gave each other email addresses, and you kind of got together casually or accidentally down the road and picked up the conversation at that time? There are many challenges before you. Can you build a consensus on minimal standards, priorities, and legal protections? Can you improve transparency and begin sharing best practices? What should all of us be doing to accelerate the collaboration between the privately controlled cyberspace and government? How can we work together to use this year between now and London to develop policies and convince our political leaders and industry leaders that the threat is real and that we need resources from both to combat it? I might respectfully offer a caveat. As you continue the discussion down the road, try very, very hard not to make the perfect solution the enemy of a good incremental one. So people are inclined to say, this is not a sprint, this is a marathon. There's a lot of work to do. And so finally, I say to you respectively, the final challenge, simply put, is to take this dialogue that you've begun in a single location, now that you disperse and go back to multiple locations, how do you reconvene back maybe in the single location of the cyber world between now and London to continue these discussions, to follow up on the recommendations, and to build a platform of accomplishments, not of ideas, but of accomplishments between now and when you reconvene in London? I suggest, and I don't want to give you more work, John, but maybe there ought to be a quarterly or a semi-annual report. Maybe we ought to set up